Okay, last week we had to stop a little short because we simply didn't have enough time to begin verse 22. So we pick up this week with Shemot, also known as Exodus, chapter 21, verse 22. Literally in English, it says, "And because strive, woman, and strive he wife pregnant, and he go out he offspring her, and not he be harmed, punished, he punished, as that he put upon him, Lord, the woman, and give with judgment." All right, so obviously that doesn't make any sense, but we'll work our way through it and see what we can make of it. Started off with vechi, which is and if or and for or and because. They all basically mean the same thing. Actually, they all really do mean the same thing, so you could say it any way you want to. The next word is inatzu, strive. Literally, it's he, strive, they. But anyway, it's strive. It's strive. It's properly to fly, hence pinions of a bird. Feathers. Locks of hair hanging over the forehead, and as it were, flying. To seize one another by the locks. Now it's starting to make sense. To seize one another by the hair, hence to quarrel, to strive. To strip off a garment from anyone, to draw out a sword from a sheath, hence to make a land empty, to despoil, to strip it of its inhabitants. So that's pretty serious strife there. The next word is anashim, which literally means will men, or men will, because men will strive. They will come to blows. They will pull the sword out and go to war. They will pull each other's hair out like in an all-out cat fight. I mean, that's really what the word means. So men will do this, and it's just the word for man as opposed to woman, male as opposed to female. It's a man. Men will do that, and it's in plural, so it's men will do this. Menagefu, and strikey. So someone's going to get struck. They're going to strive, and someone's going to smite. They're going to double up the hand and punch. They're going to open the hand and slap. They're going to pull out the sword and stab. Pull out the guns and shoot. I mean, men are going to do this. They're going to strike. Isha. Now here's the word for woman as opposed to man. So a woman's going to get struck at some point, right? Then it says hara, which is pregnant. So if a pregnant woman gets struck, because men will fight, the time will come when a pregnant woman will be struck. They yatsu, and he go out, he, it's to go out, to go forth, to germinate, to expand. When speaking of men or humans and other things, especially to go out, to go forth, to leave this place and go that place, to go forth, to be born. Are you seeing the connection there? So she got struck because two guys or more were in a fight. She's pregnant. She got struck. Now it's switching to the baby goes out. The baby is born. Yet la deha, her offspring. Her offspring goes out to be born. It's the child of the woman. Velo, and not yiyeh, which is to be, to exist. So he's not sown. He's not harmed. Her being struck did not harm the child. That's what's being said here. Anosh, punished, to fine, to impose a fine. The primary idea appears to be that of imposing, to lay upon, use of sums of money exacted in war. So he's going to be punished, a fine of some sort, whether it's of money or prison time or whatever. Some fine is going to be enforced. Anesh, he will be punished. So this is serious. When they say it twice, it's he will absolutely be punished. Because it's the same word being used twice. Ka'asher, as that, yashit, which is literally he put, to set, to place, to appoint. And so somebody's going to establish, someone is surely going to establish a punishment, establish a fine of some sort. Alive, which is upon him. speaking of the person who struck the woman who was pregnant, but the baby was born and is okay. Someone delivering something, I think. Go ahead. Sorry, someone's knocking on our door. That's weird what it does to the light. Y'all see that? I guess she's having a sign for something. Oh well, we'll just keep going. So it's going to be placed upon him, Baal, the Lord, the master, the possessor. So if she's a maid servant, then she has a master or lord over her. If she is someone's daughter, that's her lord, her master. If she is married, that's her lord, her master. It's just a generic word. It's like saying Mr. or Sir. Then it's Ha'isha, the woman's Isha, the woman. It's the master of the woman. Ve Natan. That's and give. Now this is, remember we talked about this, to give is to cause somebody to receive. Somebody has to absolutely receive something, right? So someone's going to receive beef limin with a judge. With, the bait in front of this word is with a judge. All right, so here's your translation. Actually, it's my translation. Verse 22. And if men strive, and a pregnant woman is struck, and her offspring is born, it goes out. That's an idiom. The offspring goes out, in other words, if it's born, and he, speaking of the baby, is not harmed, he, the perpetrator, will absolutely be punished according to that which her husband gives him as per a judge. The husband is not allowed to lay anything on the perpetrator beyond that which a judge agrees to as per the Torah. That's what's being said. He gets to, so if you hit someone's wife, his punishment can be, now he gets to, tie your hands behind the back and beat you up for 5 minutes. Well, if a judge is okay with that, which he won't be because the Torah won't allow it, but if he were, then that would be the punishment. If it's $100 and the Torah allows that, which it actually does, then that's your punishment. But the man cannot decide that you're to be put to death when you hit a woman who she wasn't harmed, the baby wasn't harmed, but she hit, she was hit, and so therefore you think you ought to be put to death. The judge won't allow it. That's why a judge has to be involved. Now, remember, the sages from the Middle Ages, from the Dark Ages, and they're called Dark Ages, Middle Ages, whatever you want to call it, 12, 13, 1400s, around that period, they were not Hebraist. Most of them didn't even speak the Hebrew language. Seriously and literally, they didn't speak the language. So they didn't know the idioms. They didn't understand the way of the thought at all. And of the ones who did speak Hebrew, they were so Hellenized by that point in time that they no longer understood the idiomatic nature of the original language. So keep that in mind when you read this. It's not that these people are idiots or any of that kind of thing. They were actually very educated men, but they were oftentimes, they couldn't have been more wrong than they were. They got off on these tangents because, not knowing that something was an idiom, they turned it into something very literal. Okay, keep that in mind. So Rashi limited the strike to one that was unintentional. But the text doesn't support that idea, because he's thinking, well, if she didn't get harmed terribly and the baby didn't get harmed, then it was probably unintentional. No, it says that she gets struck. That's the end of the story. Even Ezra, Cassuto, and Onkelos thought that her offspring goes out meant that the child was born dead. This is what I'm talking about. These are not moronic toads writing this stuff. These are men who didn't know the difference. Now, Cassuto surprises me because he should have known the difference. Onkelos and even Ezra, that doesn't surprise me because of the time period and the Hellenization. Cassuto really did surprise me on this one. Rashi must have thought pretty much the same thing because he interpreted it to mean that so long as no harm came to the woman beyond a miscarriage, forgetting the child altogether. So it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's as if, because they basically, what they're setting it up to say is God doesn't care about life. God doesn't care about a fetus. And that couldn't be more anti-God than anything else that you could ever come up with. That's anti-God. God is very much protective of that child, of that fetus. God is all about life, not death. So that's why that bothers me as much as it does. But again, these are men who simply came up at a time where that kind of information wasn't available to them. So where it says, according to the husband, Rashi and Rashbam both felt that the court, not the husband, addresses the fine or assesses the fine, even though the text said something completely different. It was up to the man, so long as it was okayed by the judge, and the judge, of course, was going to base it on the Torah. So they're not right about that. Okay. Just want to make sure we all understand that this is all about, in this case, nobody was terribly harmed. I mean, the woman may have gotten a black eye. She may have been knocked to the ground and got a bruise. She may have even gotten a broken arm. It doesn't really specify anything about the woman. This is about the child. But if the child is okay, then the woman's probably going to be okay too. But something for the woman will come up eventually in this. So anyway, let's move on. Shemot 21, or Exodus 21, now we're on verse 23. Now literally it says, and if harmed he be, and give soul for soul. Ah, it's as if they didn't even read this verse, isn't it? Because you should already be able to get that. Ve'im, and if, ason, harmed. We just had that word. The yes. So if he be harmed, remember we're talking about the child. This is all about the child, not about the woman at this point. So a while ago it was the baby was born. Everything was cool. He wasn't harmed. Now it's saying, but if he was, now the next thing it's going to say about that is the natata. So there's your natan. There's your give, to cause, to receive word. Something's going to be given here. Nefesh. That's the soul. That's the part of you that goes on after your body dies, the anima by which your body lives, the taking in, the breathing in, the out, your soul. It's what you think of. So this person who harmed this child, soul for soul, tahat, which means for, nafesh, soul for soul. So here's your translation. And if he, speaking of the child, be harmed. Now remember, this is an idiom. A soul for a soul is an idiom. Idiom means the punishment should fit the crime. Soul for soul. A soul for a soul means the punishment should fit the crime. So now we're going to move into the part of this law where we're talking about eye for eye, tooth for tooth, blah, blah for blah, blah. Right? Because what they're saying every single time is the punishment should fit the crime. Some of the sages believed that this verse meant that the child was born dead. If she miscarried, wouldn't that mean the child was born dead? Anyway, but the text doesn't support it. These beliefs came about because of a complete lack of understanding of basic Hebrew idioms by these men who lived long after the period of Hellenization of the Jewish world. They were Hellenized, they didn't know the difference. We've begun to learn the difference because of all the things, the books, the scrolls that we've found in the ground since these people were alive. All right, the text says the child was born but was harmed in some way. For example, if the child was born blind, the perpetrator would be responsible for the salary the child would have made as an adult, as well as all medical expenses incurred because of his blindness, right? So if the child's father was, say, a jeweler, somebody who had to look through the little eyeball thingy all day, and a jeweler made, $1,000 a year. This is way back in the day, right? Now, because he's blind, he has to take some menial job where he can only make $100 a year. This is what this is talking about. The punishment has to fit the crime. This man now owes that man the difference in that salary that he should have been able to make. It's where America gets that whole idea of suing somebody and then having to pay out millions. This is where all this comes from. They're supposed to make up the difference. And that's how a punishment fits the crime. You don't kill a man because the baby's born blind. But he does have to make up the difference of what that child would have been. And they just had to base it on, in their world, the child became what the father became. So you can't say, well, our child would have been a neurosurgeon making, $100,000 a year. No, they wouldn't have gone there, because in their world, the son almost always became what the father was. So it would have been based on the father. It amazes me that so much of the laws that exist in the biblical world, long before the giving of the Torah, made provision for the death of a child. Some put the perpetrator to death, others caused him to pay a large fine, but the horrible mistranslation of these two verses make the women of little worth and a murdered child of no value at all. That's what bothers me so much about the way they were translated. And once they started on that path, they just kept going down that path. You look at your English translations, and it's just kill them, kill them, kill them, kill them. And it was never about killing anybody. So keep that in mind. In the previous verse, many of the sages thought that the child goes out meant that there was a miscarriage, as I've said. But then they cannot explain what it means that there was no harm in this verse. Now, this verse talks about there being harm, and they see that as death. You can't have it both ways. If the child goes out unharmed, he is born. If the child goes out harmed, he is miscarried. Thus, soul for soul. The man who causes the miscarriage will not pay a financial fine. He will be put to death because he murdered a baby. That's what they should have gotten out of this. All right. So now we move on to verse 24. Remember, 24 is a continuation of what's going on here. We're still talking about a baby that has been harmed because a woman was struck. It says literally, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. Is this starting to have a different feel to it now? You see why I wanted to wait? So it says ayin. That's the eyes. And the word ayin is like, really the picture behind it is a flowing fountain. And it's because your eyes cry because water flows out that they got their name. So it's of this flowing fountain. So it's eye tahat, which means for ayin, eye for eye. Then it says shen, that's this thing right here. You probably can't see it, but I'm touching my tooth. Tooth, it's the thing that grows right there in your mouth. The tooth, tahat, shen, tooth for tooth. Yad, yod, right? Yad. Hand, tahat, hand for yad, hand for hand. Regel, your foot. Tahat, regel, foot for foot. So here's the translation, and I'm going to put the idiom back in. The punishment should fit the crime. 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 Eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. The punishment should fit the crime. Rashi said that in all cases, monetary compensation was intended, because he couldn't understand why somebody had to be put to death because a child was born without an eyeball. Even Ezra felt that if a person didn't pay monetary compensation, he should suffer the same fate as the child. You see where the Middle East got this, poking people's eyes out, cutting their hands off. You see where this is coming from? Because you do realize that in the Muslim world, they stole the Jewish Bible, perverted it heavily, and call it the Quran. Just saying, that's what they did. They even used parts of the New Testament in their Quran. Don't know if you knew that, but it's there. Otherwise, what's the Jesus stuff doing in it? So they did that. Sounds like someone else I know of. Oh, the Christians, they did the exact same thing, right? So, but in the Middle East, and the Christians, by the way, were doing this. They were poking people's eyes out and cutting their hands off and cutting their ears off and all kinds of stuff because it didn't understand the idiom. When you believe that something is literal when it's not, it's like believing that cats and dogs really do fall from the sky when someone says it's raining cats and dogs. And the biblical Hebrew text was written in an idiomatic manner because it was an idiomatic language. So things that were supposed to be taken idiomatically were taken literally, and bad things came of it. Nachmanides felt that if the perpetrator could not pay, he should be sold into slavery until his debt was paid. That actually is an option by Torah standards. He is correct in that that's an option. To say that that's what should happen, it wasn't for him to say. But I don't think he meant it that way either. I think he just meant that was an option. So we move on to 21:25. Again, we're talking about a child who has been harmed because a woman has been struck. Do you start to see what's happening here about the woman? This is a law that you don't have to say, hey, if the woman gets struck, this is what you do. Why? Because all of this about the child is for the protection of not just the child, but the woman. You don't strike a woman. Are you starting to get the feel here that God's saying never strike a woman? You should be, because that's what the point is. Anyway, so we get to the words scar for scar, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. Kebiya, that's a scar. It's either from a burn or from a cut or whatever. It's a scar. It's what you think of. Tahat. So you have kebiya, tahat, kebiya, scar for scar. Petsa, tahat, petsa, wound for wound. A wound, it could be just about anything, because even the scar is from a wound, right? So you got the wound for wound. Chabura, which is a stripe or a bruise, the mark of strokes on the skin. So if there's bruises, then that will be paid for. If there's cuts, scars, just trying to cover any kind of damage that you could possibly think of. You don't harm a woman and thus harm the baby inside that woman. They're just building on it and building on it and building on it, saying don't touch a woman and don't touch your child. So then we have Habura, Tahat, Habura. I'm going to read it with the intent it was meant. The punishment should fit the crime. The punishment should fit the crime. The punishment should fit the crime. Scar for scar, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. This is exactly how we were supposed to see these things. This is exactly what was meant by them. Rashi noted that the forms of injury in this verse were limited to things which cause pain, as opposed to the previous injuries which do not lead to the loss of the limb. All I can say is okay. Now we are given an example of a punishment fitting the crime. God's going to actually give us an example. We're also given a great example of the text following associated instead of chronological or systematic order, in that eye for eye was mentioned in verse 24 and now will be associated with verse 26. Does that make sense to you? We're not going in chronological order. We're going in associated order. That's how Hebrew worked back then. So forget the chronological stuff. Shemot, or Exodus 21:26. Literally in English, it would translate, and because he strike man, I, manservant he, or I have the Hebrew word instead of the English, or I maidservant he, and destroy it to make free he send away they, because I they. Okay, that's a little harder to understand, but if you read it a few times, I think you get it. Vehi, that's and because, and if, right? Yakeh, we've had this word, that's the double up the fist and punch. That's to open up the fist and slap. That's to take a cane pole and hit somebody with it, to take a whip and hit somebody, a rock, whatever. You've struck somebody. And then it says, because he strike Ish, because a man strikes someone in this case. So Ish is man. Et ain. So if he strikes somebody's eye, this is where we're going. If he strikes somebody's eye, avdo. Now we know the somebody. That's the manservant. So if a servant has been struck in the eye, you know what a servant is. It's a person who has, in the Jewish world, it's probably a Jew who has become an indentured servant. Now, there were other servants other than Jews. They were almost always indentured servants. They were rarely literally owned like American servitude was, which brought about the Civil War. It was not like that in the Hebrew world, because you did have somebody that you would own in that. If, remember, if a servant, because we've already had this law, if a servant, while in the employment of another man, got that man's woman servant pregnant and they had a kid, and he wanted to stay together and her become his wife, he had to pay for her. And the price of paying for her was that he had to become literally that man's property for the rest of his life. What didn't change was that that man was still going to receive a salary. He was still going to have a place to live. He was still going to have clothes to wear. He was still going to have food to eat. All of that was part of the deal. I hope you're following what I'm saying. So he literally was another man's servant, but that for the rest of his life. But that did not mean he didn't have just a regular, 9 to 5 type job, which back then they worked from sun up to sundown, not 9 to 5. So it was a long day, but he did have free time. He did have Shabbat. He did have all of the holidays off, just like everybody else did. They didn't work on those days. So it's not exactly the same thing. And then there were people who, if they were captured in war and didn't want to all die, they could become servants just in the same manner. They would have a paycheck, they would have a house, food, clothing, all of those things, and they would have all the Jewish holidays off, even though they weren't Jews. Of course, they had to be circumcised. The Jews would have already been circumcised. Just saying, I hope you're getting this. So if this manservant, who would most likely be a Jew, an indentured servant, if his eye is struck, or it says, because the word is O, we would spell it just with an O or maybe OH in English so that you'd know how to pronounce it. But that word O in Hebrew means or et ain, or the eye, amato, of the female servant. So if a male servant is struck in the eye, or a woman servant is struck in the eye, then it says veshihata, and it's destroyed. So somebody got struck in the eye, and now that eye is destroyed. And you know what I mean. The eyeball can still be there, but they can't see out of it anymore, or they can't see well enough to really do anything with it, or whatever. I think this is more about the eye is basically gone. It's been destroyed in some way, but if it's blinded, it's still destroyed. I just want to point that out. So if that eyeball is destroyed, la hafshi, so that servant's going to be made free. He's going to be freed from his servitude. Yeshalechenu, and he will be sent out to send away. So he goes out free. He's sent on. You're free. You don't owe this man any more money. Even though if you were an indentured servant, he's already given you a large amount of money that you went off and used to pay for some land you wanted for when you got out of your servitude, or you went off and paid off some bills that were owed by your family before the servitude or whatever. He's already given you that money. But now you've lost an eye because of this man, or in his employment. It doesn't even say that it's because of him, but in his employment, you've lost an eyeball. So now you go out not owing him the rest of that money. You don't have to work it off anymore. He has to pay that back by setting you free. You owe him nothing. Then it says tahat, which is, eye for eye, but in this case we're really more about because eno, because of his eye. He's going out free because of what happened to his eye, or she's going out free because of what happened to her eye. So here's your translation. And if a man strike the eye of his manservant, or the eye of his maidservant, and destroy it, he will send that servant away free because of the eye. So there's you an example of the punishment fitting the crime. So this is association, not chronology. Because we've been talking about what do you do about a woman who's been struck and the baby's been harmed. Now we're talking about two adults. So did we switch gears? No. What we have here is association. The association is connected to an example of a punishment fitting the crime. All right. Even Ezra said that the purpose of this law was to protect servants from cruel masters. That is one of the purposes, yes. It is a nice sentiment, but a cruel master will never care about this law, nor send a servant away because of it. So the law is a little more than what he's saying, right? Now the next verse, and if tooth of a manservant he, or tooth maid servant he caused to fall out, to make free he send away they because tooth they. So now you kind of get it already, right? Because it's almost exactly like the previous. Ve'im, and if, or because shen, that's your tooth, avdo, there's your male servant, o, the word o, which means or in Hebrew, shen, or tooth, amato, of a maid servant, yapil, he causes that to fall out. That's what the word means, to fall out, to fall. La hafshi, and make him free. Yeshalchenu, he will send him away. So it's almost tahat shino, because of his tooth, or because of her tooth. So it's almost exactly the same thing, right? Verse 27, and if he, speaking of the master, causes the tooth of a manservant or the tooth of a maidservant to fall out, he will send them away free because of the tooth. It really does protect the servant, right? But here's something you also have to know. If the master has charged someone else to punish his servants, and this happens, well, you can't say, well, it wasn't the master who did it, right? Yeah, it was, because whatever someone does in the name of the master did. That's the way it works in the biblical world. So either way, whether he did it or he had someone else do it, told someone else to do something and it happened, he's still the one responsible for it. The sanctity of life and limb should be clear from all of these verses. Do you get it? You don't harm another human being. You certainly don't kill an unborn child, let alone another human being. Rashi and even Ezra agree that other principal limbs fall under this same judgment. I say that every part of the human body falls under it. See, they're taking it literally again, when they should be seeing that this is idiomatic about the whole body and not just about the examples given. Okay. Verse 28 literally says, and if gore ox, man or woman, and die, stone he stoned the bull, and not he eat. Flesh he, and Lord the ox acquitted. Okay, so this is a little odd, but it'll be easy enough to figure out. Vehi, and if yigach, now that we have a brand new word, to push, to strike with the horn, used of a horned animals, the idea of striking or pushing with the horn. And anyone who's grown up around animals, particularly bulls, like I did, you know that the ones that have those horns have a tendency sometimes, some of them have a tendency to want to shove you around with it. They can kill you doing that. So it's not cool, right? So if this animal gores, that's what to gore somebody is. It's not just to thrust through with the, not just to stab somebody, which would be considered to be gored, but it's also the shoving people around with the thing. Sure, this is the word for ox, so called from its strength and boldness. It's of a bull, of cattle. It's the same word for a bull as it is for an ox, because it's about the strength and the boldness of the animal, which both of these animals share. So they share the same name. It's it. This is a general word for one of the ox tribe, without distinction of age or its sex, even, because the female oxen or the female, well, there's no such thing as a female bull, is there? A female cow can do the same thing, right? Anyway, this is et ish. So if it gores a man, if it starts shoving a man around or stabs a man with his horn, right? It's a man as opposed to a woman. It's just the generic word for man. This is O, which remember that means or. So if a man shoves a man or isha or a woman, vamet, and someone dies. The man or the woman dies, right? Sako, stone. That's a stone. You're to overwhelm something with stones. It is a form of capital punishment used by the Hebrews, as Jusinius says. So it's to stone, the animal will be stoned. And it says, Yisakel. So stone, he will be stoned. Don't get any clearer than that, right? Hashor, that's the bull, just in case you weren't clear already, he's going to say the bull, below, and not Ye'achel. It's from the word ochel, the eating. Not ohel, which is a tent, but ochel, which is to eat, right? So no one's going to get to eat this animal. Et basaro, you won't eat his flesh. You're not going to chop him up, cook him, and eat him. Uva'al, and the Lord, the person who owns the animal, the Lord, the master. It's like saying Mr. or Sir. Remember that? Hashur, the Lord of the ox or the bull, Naki, is acquitted. Why is he acquitted? Well, because the price has already been paid. It's to be made pure, to be made innocent. This is the sacrifice for the sin, if you will. So here's your translation. If an ox gore a man or a woman and they die, the ox will absolutely be stoned to death, and its flesh will not be eaten. Then the Lord of the ox will be acquitted. Now, Rashi believed that any animal, wild or domesticated, that gored a human was subject to the law because he felt that the scriptures only cited the most common instances. I don't agree with that. I think that Rashi believed that any animal, wild or domesticated, that gored a human was subject to the law. I think what he should have said is because he failed to recognize that the scriptures only cited the most common instances. Or maybe because he felt, oh, I see, because he felt that the scriptures only cited the common and not all of them. So actually, I do agree with him. Casuto said, in the legal tradition of the ancient East, goring by an ox was the typical example of damage caused by cattle or domestic animals. So we're all in agreement. Its flesh shall not be eaten. Rashbam took this to a literal extreme in that he felt that no Gentile or even a dog was allowed to eat the meat. Actually, the point would have been just give it to the dogs, the actual dogs, not Gentiles being called dogs. I agree with his feeling about Gentiles not being allowed to eat the flesh because the text is clearly disallowing any benefit to a human. But an actual dog, come on. What are we to do with what are we supposed to do with this animal? Dig a 4-foot deep hole and bury the ox so the wild dogs don't get to it? The owner is free from personal punishment except for the cost of the animal. In this verse, because it is assumed that he had no way to know his animal would gore a human. It will be different in the next verse. Verse 29, and if ox gore he yesterday 3, and he has been told with owner his, and not he kept it, and make dead man or woman, the ox he stone, and also Lord his he die. It's confusing, but not so bad. Now, even if sure, there's your word for ox or bull. It's really for bull because it could be an ox, it could be a cow. Nagach. So if the bull gores, he pushes, he strikes, he stabs with his horn. Who? It means he in Hebrew, or it. In this case, probably it. Mi temol. If he gore yesterday, she'll shown 3. If he gore yesterday 3, that should have been a wild hair tip off that this is an idiom, right? Because yesterday 3 makes no sense anywhere at any time. It's an idiom. Behuad, and he has been told. It sounds like somebody's told his owner something, but his owner knows that it's happened repeatedly. Is what's actually being said. Be there alive. So the master of the bull knows that this bull has repeated this subject, and he's probably even been warned, or at the very least he's been told by other people. Bello and not yish merenu. And he didn't keep it. He didn't tend to it. He's got an animal that has horns. He knows that animal is shoving people around. Whether it stabbed anybody or not makes no difference. It's been shoving them around. He knows this, yet he didn't tie it up to a tree. He didn't put a fence around it. He didn't chop it up and have a feast with it. He just let this thing wander around aimlessly, if you will. He's not taking care of the issue. Behemoth, and that bull makes dead what? Ish, a man. That bull finally kills a man, or Isha, or a woman. Hashur, the ox or the bull, Yisakel, he stoned, Nagam, and also Be'alive and his Lord. So the ox will be stoned, and the Lord will be stoned. Yamut, until they are dead. So here's your translation. And if his ox tends to gore, and if his ox tends to gore, yesterday 3, he has a tendency. Yesterday 3 means that ox has a tendency to repeat his behavior. Yesterday 3. And if his ox tends to gore, and he has been told, and the owner has not watched it, and it kills a man or a woman, the ox will be stoned to death, and the Lord will be put to death. Because it becomes murder at this point. Rashi's, you could probably call it manslaughter, but it's in God's world, it's murder. That's why you're put to death over it. Rashi said that an ox legally becomes a gorer after it gores 3 times because he didn't know it was an idiom. No. He simply didn't recognize the Hebrew idiom. He also said that this law covered biting, thrusting itself against a person, and kicking, but the text does not support these claims. Kasuda pointed out that if an ox is known to be a gorer, that means that it hasn't yet killed anyone. Okay, I can agree with that, and I think that's the point. Basically, if your animal tends to do things that can get someone killed and you do not take the proper precautions, and your animal kills someone, it is as if you killed them. You've committed murder in God's eyes. Now, Shemot 21:30. Looks like we have time enough for maybe one more. If some he put on him, and give redemption, sold he as all that he put on him. This is going to be interesting. So it starts off im, so it's if kofer. That means some, S-U-M. They use it of a village or a hamlet. They use it of pitch, so called from its being overlaid, covered over. It's a price of expiation or redemption. They use it for that. Why? Because someone's done something, and instead of them being put to death for that thing, if somebody's willing to agree to it, then rather than the person die for this event, if the family that's left says, we'll take a price, so it's a lawsuit. You shot. So if he's put a price, if a price has been established, has been set, has been placed alive on him. So if the guy who's looking at a death sentence can come to an agreement with the person who suffered the loss, the family who suffered the loss, in monetary terms, benatan, and he gives, that's natan, that's to give somebody, to place it in their hand, pidyon, the redemption, the price of the redemption. So we've established a price, and this guy can put that price in the hand of the surviving family, nafsho, his soul, that guy's life, kechol, the totality of a share of that you shot, he put that place that has been, the totality of the price that has been placed is being given, the total price, alive on him. So it didn't make a lot of sense, but here's the translation. If a sum is laid on him, then he will pay all that is laid on him for the redemption of his soul. Think about it. You live in close proximity. You're probably related to this person who did not take care of his ox, and you've lost the life of, say, your father. Well, but this is your uncle, and it's your favorite uncle, and you don't want to see your uncle die because you know that your uncle was just being stupid and he wasn't actually trying to murder your father. So what's happening here is it's saying if that family is willing to say, look, make him pay off, the note on our house, and he pays that note off, he has to pay all of it. But if he pays it all off, then that is the price of redemption for his death sentence. And it's only in the case of a man who didn't tend to something. He didn't actually commit the murder, but he didn't tend to it and prevent it. So that's manslaughter, right? Yeah. So in the case of murder, you don't have this. But in the case of a manslaughter, you do. Even Ezra said that since the man was not the actual killer, he could pay a fine in place of his life. However, the previous law seems to argue against this assessment. The text does not actually tell us why an exception to the death penalty is given, but we can be sure that the exception was given, right? So we don't know for sure that this is the reason, is all I'm saying, but I have to agree with him to the extent that it's the most likely reason. Yeah, we can get through this because it's almost the exact same one. In verse 31, well, how many verses do we have in this? 37? We better call it a day. Okay. We'll pick up with the last little bit of it next week. Shalom, shalom, y'all.